Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about code monkeys. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, do you think that that was posted on a video that I made at the very least, which was called "What are the best types of developers to have in your company?" And as I lovingly like to call it, there's usually, in my opinion, two types of well, I don't know how to describe it because you're trying to describe a type of behavior in a person, and I like to call the people who use the types of developers who usually focus almost like they don't actually do a lot of big picture thinking, or like they don't actually do much more. They have to be assigned things, and usually they're very good at just producing whatever the story is about, but they can't actually solve like dynamic problems. They really only know the coding. And then you have philosophy, and I usually refer to them to either as code monkeys or engines or something like that. People who like just try to produce whatever is requested of them. And then you have philosophers, who are usually more big picture types, who are they usually do a lot of more thinking related to delivery and working more effectively, etc., etc. They are more creatively minded, if that makes sense. So the comment was, interesting video, Frederick. Do you think that the type of developer changes over time or stays the same over a career? For example, does a typical code monkey eventually become more of a philosopher with more experience? I would imagine that the social aspects would stay relatively consistent over time. Well, the social aspects is actually the thing that usually evolves the most, because usually when a person gets older, their way of looking at their interactions with other people changes to a certain degree. It's sort of like, the way of behaving towards other people changes as you grow up from being a child to a teenager to an adult, to a young adult or something like that, and then it kind of continues. Your maturity goes up, if that makes sense. So the social aspects usually evolve more than the type of personality that you have, because if you compare a engine or a code monkey or like a philosopher or someone like that to each other, they have something that is, I think, very well. It's not really just about coding here, it is about the way of looking at the world. And if you look at the norm of people, the norm is that people are not creative in terms of like big picture thinking and lofty thought processes and philosophical mindsets and so forth and so forth. It is actually the norm that people are more, they have a more limited imagination or a limited way of limited creativity. And I don't say that for like with any nefarious intentions or anything like that, but if you look at the world as a whole, I think that we should be able to agree on that there are more people uh, who have to be led by the hand in order to achieve goals than there are people who will creatively solve them from scratch. It's one of the reasons why I argue to people that if you want a average person to get some ideas, you have to give them Legos. It's one of the main reasons why I argue that computer games like The Sims or similar sorts of games are so beloved. I think it's one of, if not the most sold game ever, for the reasons that I argue that the average person who is like an engine type or something like that, they don't do so well with creative thinking when they have nothing, when like they're literally just asked solve this problem and then they have to figure out. Like, it's an overwhelming experience to them. But if you give them something to start off with, they can actually make some progress, but they usually never get to the same level of creative thinking as the philosophers, because the philosophers are usually your artists, your designers, it doesn't have to be like an artist type of person, but I hope that you see what I'm saying. Some people are I'm not saying it's genetics, but they are inherently creative minded. They see the world in a different way than the average person. And I have only ever seen that change with a very radical change to personality, and I've never seen it happen to anyone I've ever known, ever. I've never met anyone who has gone through that sort of transformation, because it's really a matter of, well, rather what I find usually is that the main difference between a engine or a code monkey type of person and someone who is more philosophical, creatively minded, or so forth, or a visionary or something like that, is that the engine type of personality spends very little time imagining what the world can look like, and spends more time looking at the world as it is, or if that makes sense. Whereas the visionary imagines things. They have a very strong imagination usually, and a gigantic interest in learning and adopting new tools. That stuff still is there in the engine, but the difference is that the engine is learning information to execute on what is there today, whereas the visionary has this ability to imagine how would they do things, if that makes sense. And that is I can't explain this. There are smarter people than me who can give you information on these sorts of, well, observations, really. And I've never seen this change in a person. The thing that I have seen, though, which is good, I think, for both parties, that's why I argue in this video for that these type of people, usually if you can find a social bridge, so because I mean it's not like they can't work together, usually it's, as I said, the personality has very little to do with it. It's more about how does their brain work. Some people's brains work more in terms of execute a task really, really well, and some people want to imagine things, and they get actually very bored by doing things a certain way. They want to be creative. And when you have these two working together, they influence each other in a very positive way. This is where I argue that there's a compounding effect if you put the right people together, because the engines are usually more, as I said, they're more about executing, and they're usually good with details, and they keep track of how things are actually moving along, if that makes sense. And that is a very powerful thing for the creatives, who in many cases are a little bit more, well, at least what I've met, that they have less structure in their work process and their way of thinking and so forth. Not always, but in many cases, where that is a very good counterbalance. And the people who are more code monkeys or engine types, they usually get inspired. They get more creative by being with the people who are more philosophically minded and so forth, if there's a good relationship. So it's not like just because people are more prone to being an engine that they never have any ideas. It's just not something that's not going to be their trait. It's not something that is going to be telling for them. And as I said, I've never seen this happen based on that they're just more experienced. It has to do with who are they hanging out with usually. So what I want you to take away from this is that I don't think that the type of developer stays completely the same over a career. It depends on what you mean, because you're gonna change as a person, whether you like it or not usually. And I've never, nobody is exactly the same person as they grow up. We evolve, right? But when it comes with the way that our brain works, the way we think about the world, and being someone who is more of a creative versus not a creative, or things like that, I've never seen that change more than on success stories and people who sort of reimagine themselves. The social media profiles who go and say that, yeah, I was doing this and this and that, and now I'm living this almost bohemian lifestyle, or things like that. So it does happen. It's not that it can't happen. But it's not the exact same thing, because the difference here is how do you. It's sort of like a philosopher's fundamental thought process is one that imagines a new way of doing something. They try to invent. They are usually the people who invent the next set of tools or the next idea. And as I've said before, guys, this is very dangerous when you're dealing with an inexperienced philosopher, because they're gonna fuck up so much. They're gonna create a lot of shitty solutions, but it's the same mindset that ones that are really good, these are the guys and girls who invent the tools that most of us are using. These are the true innovators. It's just that they have to be very good at it in order to do it well. It's the same thing with music or whatever. They create things, and the average person does not possess that capability. And I've never seen that be down to experience, because, guys, there are people who are very, very experienced in software development and other areas who never have that way of thinking. They know everything there is to know about something, but they have never, and probably will never, be able to imagine a new set of tools or a new way of doing things, or so forth and so forth. But execution, when it comes to just doing things that they are told, they're extremely good and very, very capable. They're very competent people. And I never say to people, I always say to people, one is not better than the other. Because when you want shit to be done, and you know what you want to be done, you want someone who just gets down and does it really well. You don't want some philosopher type who just keeps on reimagining things and just slows everything down and frustrates you. But on the other hand, if you're looking for ideas on a new creative solution, having someone who never has an idea is not really going to help you. So it's never about who is better here. It is about what is appropriate for the moment. Have a great day.